Did you know that there are two major mistakes that you may be making when you are trying to take notes at a conference that could be getting in the way of your learning as much as you can while you're there? Obviously, when you're going to a conference, you're taking notes to try to help you remember. And so I have some ideas for you about what to actually write down when you're there to learn. This also works well for things like webinars or Zoom conferences. It doesn't just have to be an in-person conference. And when you take notes, it helps you drill down into what's good, shareable content. One of my favorite things to do after I've been to an event is to take all of that information and share the highlights with my community so that they can learn too. That's actually a really helpful strategy because when you share the information, it helps you learn more. So let's talk about the first biggest challenge that could be getting in your way of learning what you're there to learn when you're at a conference. And that is using a laptop. More and more conferences that I go to these days, people are sitting there and they're typing away on their laptops and they're really happy with taking their notes that way. And if that works for you, I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't do it. I am going to tell you that researchers have found that laptop note-taking is actually less effective and may impair learning. It results in shallower processing, making it a little more difficult for you to actually absorb that information. In fact, studies have found that students who took notes longhand learned better. There's a study in particular that I like called "The Pen is Mightier Than the Keyboard." I'll put that link down below for you. So the first biggest thing that you want to do is make sure that you are using the method that works best for you and really consider if you shouldn't go back to longhand note-taking. Now, I will say taking notes is great because it obviously helps you remember what you're there to learn. You know, listening is great, but then when we write down as we're listening, that helps cement the information a little bit deeper. When we review our notes, and I do have a separate video that I did on having your notebook set up for a conference. I'll put that link for you as well so that you can see how I set up a conference notebook to make it easy to find the information and to keep track of everything. So reviewing also actively helps you get the information that you need into your brain. And again, so you can hopefully share it, but at least incorporate it and move forward. Now, when I'm taking notes, obviously you want to put the date, the time, the speaker, and the topic up at the top. And the reason you want to include the date and time is if you ever have to refer back to that because you're referencing it somewhere else, it's really helpful to know when and where you actually saw that person speak. And then the speaker, obviously, and the title are great. All of that information, that header information, goes into your index at the front of the book. I talk about that in my conference notebook setup. So we have our date, our time, our speaker, our topic, and those will get moved over into the index, and then we start to take notes. Here's the second biggest mistake. A lot of people, when they're taking notes, they feel frustrated because they're overwhelmed and they feel like they're constantly racing to try to keep up with everything. The goal is not to write down everything. First of all, we can speak faster than we can talk or type, so trying to write down everything is really difficult. If you're at a conference where you have the slides in a notebook in front of you, then please don't try to write down what's on the slides because that information is already there. The purpose of taking notes is to get the extra bits. It's okay to summarize what the speaker is saying in your own words. That's great. You want to focus on the key points. And if there are some asides or extra things that they're mentioning while they're on the slide, those are great things to write down because those are the things that are going to expand on the information that you're learning. I also find it's really helpful I actively listen for sound bites. Those are often gems that highlight a point or something to make it really stand out. I also really, if there are quotes that they mention or books that they mention, I will write those down because that's a great way to go research more information. if there's a person that they're referencing or a book that may have more information, it's good to know that I can take this area of study deeper. Now, I will say, when you're trying to take notes, even if we're focusing on the key points, just the extra bits, not trying to write every single thing that the speaker is saying, you may still feel a little rushed. This is where we don't have to write perfect English. I feel it's okay to use symbols or abbreviations. The goal, though, is you have to know what they mean. So if you want to use symbols, make sure they're ones that make sense to you. I'm a big fan of using numbers for words, for example, 2 and 4 and 8. Letters for words, C and R. Symbols like ampersand instead of writing and, or plus mark instead of writing plus. Those are ways to condense your writing time a little bit more. I also like to use some abbreviations for words. They're ones that I know. Obviously, you would want to come up with your own, but I use, for example, people, PL, instead of writing out the whole word, or TMRW for tomorrow. And so that could be something you could practice before you go to a conference. What are some of the abbreviations that you're comfortable with? So you can use those and make your note-taking just a little bit faster. And then the next thing that I do after the topic is over, after the session is done, either in the session room, or if you have to go out into the hallway, that's fine. I encourage you to take just a minute and write down your top 2 or 3 aha moments. What are the big things that stood out from you out of everything that you just heard? And that, again, helps cement that information for you, helps you really hone in on the information that you were there to learn. And then you can go back later and highlight or make extra notes. But if you focus on, in the event, summarizing in your own words, focusing on key points, looking for extra bits, and then writing down those aha moments, that will help you get the absolute most that you can out of any conference session, webinar, etc., that you attend. I hope this has been helpful for you. And don't forget to check out my other video on how to organize your conference notebook so that you can find the information later. Thanks for joining me. Bye, folks.